Hello, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're so happy to have you with us for this webinar today. My name is Claire McGuire. I am the Manager of Policy and Advocacy at IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. And on behalf of myself and my co-host, Brigitte Venzina, Director of Policy and Open Culture at Creative Commons, we are delighted to welcome you to our side event Towards Mondial Cults. This is a pre-conference event hosted by IFLA and Creative Commons. The ideas coming here in this event are coming from our excellent panel independently of UNESCO, but will be shared with the UNESCO Mondial Cult team following the event today. So before we get started, just a couple housekeeping points. We will be recording the presentations and the discussion today. And please note at the bottom of your screen, you should see a chat and a Q&A, and you're very welcome, and we really invite you to add questions during the course of the discussion over the next hour as they arise. We will answer them as they come in, but we will also have some time at the end to look through the questions and to address them. So please feel free. I also want to note that we will be discussing in English today, but we really recognize that English is not the spoken language of everyone on this panel and also in the audience. So please feel free to click the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen, and you can select the language of your preference to show captions in. So before we get started, or as we get started, I'd like to frame this conversation a little bit in the context of the World Conference on Cultural Policies for Sustainable Development, Mondial Cult 2025. This is the world's biggest cultural policy conference, hosted by the government of Spain in Barcelona at the end of September, and will really set the agenda for culture in the years ahead. So this side event, and I'll be introducing our panelists and getting started in a minute, but this side event was selected by UNESCO to be held ahead of the conference. And we're really building on two policy areas for Mondial Cult 2025, and that is cultural rights and culture in the digital environment. And those are priority areas for Mondial Cults. In 2022, the last edition of Mondial Cult, the declaration included a commitment for fostering an enabling environment for the respect and exercise of cultural rights in the digital environment. It also committed to building capacities to leverage digital technologies to enhance the safeguarding, promotion, digitization of, and participation in cultural heritage. And at the 2025 conference, we really hope that ministers and authorities responsible for culture collectively will recommit and work to build on these commitments. At the intersection of cultural rights and the digital environment, we must recognize there are legal, technical, and social barriers that still limit public engagement with cultural heritage. So this conversation today will explore this, as well as consider some steps to shape a more open and equitable future for heritage. And from IFLA, promoting openness around education, knowledge, research, and culture is really at the heart of what enables culture to work as a pillar of sustainable development. So I'd like to hand over now to my co-host, Brigitte from Creative Commons, who will provide a little bit more context and share a little bit about the work that they're doing at Creative Commons that led up to this side event. So Brigitte, over to you.
Thank you so much, Claire. So my name is Brigitte Vizina, and I'm delighted here to be with you co-moderating this conversation with Claire McGuire and our distinguished speakers. So I'm the Director of Policy and Open Culture at Creative Commons, and I'd like to start by offering some background on the work that we've been doing in the TERC coalition, which Creative Commons is leading. So TERC stands for Towards a Recommendation on Open Cultural Heritage, and the coalition was formed about a year ago in November of last year. And today it unites more than 60 organizations across 25 countries alongside 13 leading networks. and it aims to advance open, equitable access to heritage worldwide. And more specifically, the aim of the coalition is to support the development of an international standard-setting instrument under the aegis of UNESCO that would promote equitable access in the digital environment to heritage that is already in the public domain, so heritage that is out of copyright. And we believe that this instrument would be, in fact, a very concrete mechanism to assist UNESCO in delivering on its priorities that were established in the Mondial Cult 2022 declaration, and more specifically on its key priority of ensuring equitable access to heritage and to advance culture as a global public good. Now, we've noticed that over the last 2 decades, digital access to heritage has greatly expanded, and we know of several wonderful success stories of cultural heritage institutions that are making their digital collections widely available with open licenses and tools for public reuse. However, there are still barriers, as Claire mentioned, like legal barriers, technical barriers, social barriers that limit public engagement with heritage. And this is very problematic from a cultural rights perspective and cultural rights as they apply in the digital environment, because today's barriers to accessing our past heritage will really weaken the foundations of future generations and their cultural participation. And it will also threaten the digital equity and knowledge access that we need if we want to solve the world's more pressing problems, reach the sustainable development goals, and build connected, resilient, sustainable societies, which are all goals within UNESCO's mandate. So what we need to do is really to protect this access today in the digital environment before heritage gets lost away forever. And how exactly we're going to do this is actually the main topic of our conversation today. So with these words, I'd like to hand back over to Claire to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Brigitte. And on behalf of Brigitte and myself, we're both really delighted to have such a distinguished panel with us to help us explore these topics today. So I'm happy to welcome Alexandra Xanthaki, the UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, Tapani Sainio, Senior Minister Advisor at the Ministry of Education and Culture, Department for Art and Cultural Policy, Division for Art and Cultural Heritage in Finland, Silvia Guterres, Senior Program Officer for Libraries at Wikimedia Foundation, and Peter Scholin, Head of Digital Collections and Research at the National Library of Aruba. So without further ado, and with that background, let's go into the discussion. And I'm delighted to hand first over to the UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, who has done recent work and recent reports examining cultural rights in the digital environment. So Dr. Xanthaki, I'm delighted that you're here, and I'd like to hand over to you first.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. I have to say that I am delighted that with today's meeting, because gradually I have noticed in the last 4 years that we have started talking about culture and digitalization and digital technology more generally, to moving to cultural rights and digitalization. And I think that this is a fantastic achievement and a fantastic progress. I would like now to move from declarations to actions. And I think that, this is what we are all hoping for in this Mondial Cult. I think that, like you said, Mondial Cult 2025 is going to be a pivotal moment to actually move from principles to practice. And I think that the open access it is important that we highlight the benefits of open access, but also the fact that it must be balanced. It must enhance cultural rights by promoting inclusive participation and equitable access, but it must be implemented with community involvement, cultural sensitivity, and respect for source community control. And this is what my 2 reports to the United Nations are highlighting. Ethical digitalization requires data sovereignty, free, prior, and informed consent, and no less than that when the standards say so, and respect for source community control. Digital inclusion is essential, and we don't see it as often as one would like still. Open access can only democratize heritage if internet access, digital literacy, and infrastructure are addressed, especially for marginalized and remote communities. And I would like to see more of these, not as good practice, but as the minimum standards that states have to take specific measures to adhere to. Legal frameworks must also align with human rights, recognizing authorship as a cultural right beyond market-driven copyright models to ensure creators are respected while enabling public access. And open access and AI-driven models will suppress, unfortunately, creativity if they prioritize commercial interests or centralized control, replacing human interpretation and engagement with mere algorithmic outputs and limiting meaningful cultural participation. My report highlights the barriers that exist to cultural rights in the digital age. So it highlights the exclusion of source and heritage communities from decision-making. And we see that too often, unfortunately, digitalization projects are designed and implemented without the participation of the communities whose heritage is being digitalized or digitized. The second barrier is that digitalization is without safeguards. So uncritical digitalization, suddenly we see states coming and making statements on how wonderful digitalization is without any critique and without any measures in place to balance that. And this means decontextualizing heritage, perpetuating historical biases, and reinforcing existing power structures. We also see digitalization as a substitute for physical access. The report is very clear that this cannot be the case. Digitalization must be a complementary means to enhance access to heritage rather than instead of physical access. AI poses emerging barriers to cultural rights by undermining human creativity, limiting participation in cultural life, and dehumanizing digital environments. And it is up to the states, and I think that, I don't see this enough, the states actually talking about specific measures they are going to take in order to limit the barriers that exist to digitalization and the discrimination and exclusion that exists when it comes to digitalization, especially when it comes to persons with disabilities, when it comes to gender diverse individuals, when it comes to migrants and minorities, and of course, indigenous peoples. We do not see enough attention to the way they are affected by digitalization. We also have stopped hearing a lot from states about the digital divide. It seems that states, seem to be under the impression that everyone has access to internet. Marginalized communities frequently still lack access to digital infrastructure, skills, and representation. And we have a lack of ethical guidelines and accountability, or rather have to say, we do have more and more guidelines and codes of practice that comes from the industry or comes from human rights practitioners, but we do not have binding legal documents that are going to set out very clear targets and aims and are going to limit the harm that is being committed. And this also derives from fragmented international legal frameworks. I have tried time and time again to engage with WIPO, and this has been impossible. And somehow we seem to continue to go in parallel worlds where cultural rights are seen as something completely different to what WIPO. And when I talk to states about the importance of setting limits to digitalization, states remind me how important initiatives they have on digitalization, rather than how we can safeguard human rights. And of course, we all know that intellectual property regimes at the moment still undermine cultural rights. So what do I see? What do I want to be seen? So, and what does what do the two reports emphasize? So I would like to see digitalization being a tool for empowerment of all, and not empowerment of some, and certainly not a tool that is being used by industries. I don't want to see any more adverts from companies telling me how essential digitalization is for my future and for my cultural knowledge or progress. I want to see a more reasoned, balanced discussion by states about the measures they want to take in order to limit the problems that exist with digitalization when it comes to equity and when it comes to real empowerment. I do believe, I'm very firm about that, that digital tools offer transformative potential to preserve, to share, to celebrate cultural heritage, but only if they're guided by a cultural rights-based approach that ensures real, meaningful, effective participation, that ensures relevance and accessibility and diversity. I do want open access to be balanced. While openness is essential for equitable access, it must not undermine the control and sovereignty of source communities. And this is a discussion that has to happen, not among academics like myself, but among states and international legislators. I do think that participation must be non-negotiable, and this means free, prior, and informed consent, which means that Indigenous peoples, for example, are going to lead every single phase of projects of digitalization that directly concern them, and are going to have benefit sharing and post-digitalization rights. I do think that we all have to scream that digitalization is not neutral, and we should not pretend that it is neutral. It can reinforce, and it does reinforce, historical bias. It can, and it has decontextualized heritage, and it does promote at times, unfortunately, power imbalances because it is not critically assessed and not ethically implemented. I do think we have to be clear that physical access remains irreplaceable. I do think that we have to ensure that Indigenous peoples and minorities and vulnerable and marginalized groups are in the discussion and sometimes dominate the discussion, rather than people like myself, Western academics. I do think that, and when we talk about Indigenous peoples, we have to also take into account self-determination principles. Persons with disabilities must also be included. Intersectionality must be addressed. So gender-biased biases and overlapping forms of discrimination must be addressed. And I do hope that Mondia Cult is going to be brave enough to say to intellectual property frameworks that they really have to put human rights and cultural rights in the interpretation of their standards. And they must evolve in a way that is in sync, consistent with the human rights standards that exist, the cultural rights approach that exists. And finally, states are still the ones that have the responsibility to implement human rights. States have to take specific measures to tell their big tech companies that they have to limit their power when this power is in the detriment of cultural rights of all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for opening this panel with these very powerful recommendations stemming from your report, giving a very strong backdrop to the conversation that we are going to have now with our other panelists. And so for this next portion of the webinar, I'd like to invite our three panelists to give a short lightning presentation of how they address cultural rights in the digital environment, starting with our first speaker, Silvia Gutierrez. Silva, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good day, everyone. I have called my brief intervention from Lagos to Oaxaca, Open Cultural Heritage in Practice. It's very exciting to be here with extraordinary colleagues, echoing the powerful call of Mondial Cults Declaration, which recognizes the cultural right to diversity as a source of exchange, innovation, and creativity, as necessary for humankind as biodiversity is for nature. And as we were asking before, how can we make this come true? So today, countless cultures and knowledge systems remain invisible in our digital landscapes. And the same like Gutenberg's press once revolutionized access to knowledge, the internet promised the same. But the digital divide, as we just heard, has left us not just with data gaps, but as Alexandra Xanthaki just mentioned, also misconnections between data, information, and people. Governments, libraries, open license movements, they're all strive to reduce this divide. And my role today is to take you on a world tour through Africa, Asia, and America to show you how Wikimedia projects as public digital infrastructures are helping not only these institutions and groups to overcome this divide, but also communities, so that closing the gap means to reflect, respect, and recognize culture and its diversity as the vital public good it is, vital as biodiversity. So our first stop is in Sub-Saharan Africa. The African Library and Information Associations and Institutions, better known as AFLA, partnered with Wikimedia Foundation, Wikimedia Deutschland, and the National Library of Nigeria to address the epistemic injustice derived from the digital divide. That is, the exclusion of knowledge simply because of where it comes from. And the IWPALE project created the first ever semantic authority registry in Africa. This means we can finally move beyond the long-standing problem of only finding European and North American sources about African authors and finally seeing their own National Libraries IDs repository links thanks to their Wikibase and Wikidata connections. Because it is semantics, it allows new discoveries. Take me, for instance. I'm a literature major myself, and I was able to use this semantic database and look for women authors in it. This search led me to learn about Dr. Folake Onayemi, an expert in Greco-Roman and Nigerian literature. And despite the fact I'm super interested in comparative literature, Google searches had never surfaced her biography before. But going beyond what the algorithms prioritize, it's even more difficult when the sources aren't online yet. So let's take that prompt to take us to India, home to almost 1/5 of the global population. Yet, even for the 19 million Telugu speakers, finding information in their own language is no easy task. Take Vishwanath. He decided to turn his personal luck, which is he was able to go to a public library with his grandfather, into an opportunity for others in the digital age. And what he did is amazing. He digitized the paper catalogs, not only of that library he used to go with his grandfather, but of other libraries, making them accessible on the largest human curated source in the world, Wikipedia. Thanks to him, stories like the Paramandaya fables, which enrich his childhood memories, are now discoverable by millions of Telugu speakers. Odia and Punjabi communities took it to the next level, not only digitizing titles, but the books themselves. They transcribed them and proofread them, making them even more accessible. In a world of unsourced claims, this work ensures that cultural heritage is not just preserved, but also verifiable, traceable, and ethically rooted in the communities that created it. In Indonesia, a collaboration between the British Library and Wikimedians led to 30,000 pages of Japanese manuscripts being uploaded. And now they are not just only transcribing, but also improving tools like Transcribus to better transcribe Japanese script. And even more, they're reviving performance traditions, even singing the text as they were originally performed. Open access here is not static, it breathes life back into cultural practices, ensuring heritage is not locked in archives, but actively lived and evolving. Finally, America, the continent, of course. In Canada, the Association of Research Libraries and Wikimedia collaborated to advance reconciliation by creating inclusive linked open data about Indigenous creators. Traditional metadata often excludes, misrepresents storytellers, elders, and so on, but thanks to a collaboration with these communities and the open platform that Wikidata is, now this documentation is on their own terms. A powerful example, Cesar Newashish, a master canoe builder whose legacy was nearly invisible online, now it is visible thanks to the community who helped bring his knowledge into Atikamekw and English Wikipedia and Wikidata. And in Oaxaca, Mexico, one of the most linguistically diverse states in my country, grassroots dissident librarians wrote articles about people who are normally excluded, like Casilda Flores, who's an aguas fresquera. She does not only prepare aguas frescas, which is a delicious and fundamental beverage in Latin America, but she used her platform as a political space for preserving tradition and fighting for human rights. Librarians search through archives and open databases to sustain the information and provide the relevance needed for her to be included on Wikipedia. Across America, Wikimedia projects give communities tools to redistribute narrative power, ensuring that cultural heritage includes those who usually get written out. What these stories show us is simple yet profound. Cultural rights policies make sense only if paired with infrastructures and communities that bring them to life. I see Wikimedia projects as a river that connects open content with the people who need it, use it, and expand it. They transform abstract commitments into lived cultural rights. So thank you so much. I'm sorry if I went a little bit over the time, but hope, yes.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Thanks for taking us on this tour around the world and showing the power of open content and how it can help bring unseen and unheard voices up into our digital world. I'll hand over now to Peter Scholing, who's going to talk to us about his experience with the National Library of Aruba. Over to you, Peter.
Brigitte, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks for having me. No slides from me. It's just a story. This is a story about taking control of our own narrative, about representation, about reclaiming cultural rights online, about taking charge of your own heritage in a digital sense, and mostly about collaboration, local, regional, Caribbean, international, cross-sectoral collaboration. Imagine a country where the spoken language, a very vibrant language, a country with a very vibrant culture, a rich history, rich traditions, but where the main language is almost not represented online sufficiently, not even available on Google Translate, and where, except for a few scattered digital items in foreign collections, the cultural and historical materials are hard to get to, at least online. Well, that was the case for Aruba. It used to be the case not so many years ago. And you can sit around and wait for other actors and other institutions and other countries to prioritize digitization and access to your materials, the materials you find important. But yeah, that's not how the world works. It doesn't work that way. You have to take action yourselves. You have to put in your own efforts, digitize your own materials, and lobby for others to follow suit. So that's just what we did. Just before the pandemic, in March of 2019, we, as the National Library of Aruba, we launched our own digital National Library collection online, and with modest numbers initially, just a few hundred digital items at the time of launch. But the timing was just right, it seemed. And fast forward to 2025, where we now have Collection Aruba, the Aruba digital collection with over 180,000 digital items, with millions of pages, over 100,000 images, and thousands of hours of audiovisual materials on Aruba, about the region, and in various languages, including in our own, in Papiamento. And we've created partnerships through Collection Aruba with local, regional, and international memory institutions, the National Archives, our museums, but not only our museums and archives, but especially the ones that have the puzzle pieces that we don't have on our own islands. And also working really hard on building a regional digital heritage network in order to empower each other as well. In a recent blog post on the Creative Commons website, Brigitte, along with Dee Harris, talked about the transformative potential of open access to heritage. And in our case, it certainly was transformative. Machine learning efforts, large language models are starting to be more fluent in Papiamento, and are starting to be aware of the vast body of information available on Aruba, about our history, our traditions, and our culture. Now, we can always question how they found that information, but that's another discussion, maybe for later. But Aruba's digital cultural footprint and digital visibility are growing. Growing numbers of publications, of art expressions, educational materials using or being inspired by those materials are now openly available online. It's like an avalanche effect. It's a big impact, and it's only starting right now. And also, Papiamento, since last year, is now part of Google Translate. So for us, that's quite practical. There's a lot still to follow, but still. So we're doing this by getting our digital materials out there ourselves, and through collaborations like with the Wikimedia Foundation. Aruba has the first Wikimedian in residence in the Caribbean. We're quite proud of that. Collaborations like with the Internet Archive and other regional and international collaborations like the Digital Library of the Caribbean, DLOC, for instance, and making sure that it can be used in a clear and straightforward way by patrons, by researchers, by artists, and by other creators. And that's where our participation in Creative Commons Terra Coalition comes into play. And also Aruba being one of the initiators, and in fact, the first signatories to Internet Archives for Digital Rights of Memory Institution statement, part of their Future Memory initiative. It was recently endorsed by IFLA as well, so I think it's taking off. But there's still dangers ahead, unresolved issues, and there's still a power imbalance, if you want to call it this, between North and South, between big countries, and in our case, small island nations. But it's about our heritage, our objects in their collections we're talking about. You can call it digital gatekeeping, for instance, but in any case, potential issues to deal with in our efforts to decolonize and in our fight for open and equitable access to our cultural information. And that's why perhaps in some cases, we're quite fierce when dealing with these cases while defending our rights. It's about, if you don't stand up for your rights, nobody else will stand up for it. So it's a call to action as well. And connecting it back to cultural rights online, it's up to us to provide the information we digitized in as open a way as possible for our patrons, for the world, so that they can exercise their cultural rights as well. To close, I'd like to repeat the words recently spoken by Aruba's cultural ambassador and Mondia delegation leader. Just a few days ago, he said, "Despite our small scale, Aruba can contribute to innovation, resilience, and identity formation in the cultural sector on the world stage." And I think it's good to leave it here for now. So thank you for your attention, and back to you, Brigitte.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience. I'll quickly hand over now to Tapani Sainio, who's going to take us through the experience of Finland. Over to you, Tapani.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. So, good afternoon from Helsinki, Finland. And thank you for inviting me to this session. This is an honor and a joy, and it's also nice to be a part of the Mondia Cult conference this way, even remotely. I have around 50 years of experience from working to increase the visibility, availability, and usability of digital heritage. And to my experience, one of the recurring questions over the years has been, as you can imagine, how open the content should or may be. And I believe solving this question is very much about people and cooperation. It's extremely important to recognize different stakeholders and understand the perspective each brings to the table. And taking into account these different viewpoints, at some point, everybody needs to be on the same page about the goals of the digital transition of cultural heritage and what the cultural rights in the digital environment are. And I think this can be achieved through joint discussion and strong strategic thinking. And in our case, the work of OpenGlam and Wikimedia communities has been really important because they've been able to bring up issues for discussion in a way that also seeks solutions and does it in a creative way, such as by demonstrating new kinds of services and solutions and showing the possibilities. And next slide, please. So, but you need also to scale up these ideas. In Finland, the National Library has developed a national portal, finna.fi, which brings together millions of digital materials from public and scientific libraries, archives, and museums. Next slide, please. And Finna has also advanced search filters that help users find content that meets their needs for utilizing the materials. As you might see, Finna has almost 2 million objects that are either in the public domain or CC BY, and in addition, all of Finna's metadata is CC0. And in this development, the European app portal has been a great role model for us, and it has been very easy to follow its example and its recommendations. As you might know, European has clear strategic base. Member states are involved in it. It has strong community and support from European Commission, so it's very credible and reliable actor. Next slide, please. And in the context of UNESCO, it might be interesting to note that open educational resources are also available through Finna, as we believe that combining cultural heritage materials and learning resources provides diverse opportunities for utilizing content in schools and other learning environments. And it's important to introduce cultural heritage materials into school environments and learning, as we know what kind of media environment children and young people otherwise spend their time in. Finally, it should be noted that all of this requires ongoing cooperation, guidance, steering, and support, also financial. And for example, when our ministry grants subsidies to museums for digitization, we require that the metadata contains information about usage rights marked with CC licenses or right statements, unless there are legal, contractual, or ethical obstacles to do this. And I think this is also something that we as funders are obliged to do. So these were my ideas for building blocks for sustainably open solutions for heritage. Thanks for attention.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our speakers who've really now taken some of what we spoke about in the introduction a step further and shared some really emotionally evocative and very practical and actionable ideas that are already in place. So I hoped we could take a bit of time now to maybe dig in a little deeper to some of these ideas. And again, I would like to encourage, I'm seeing some chat, which is wonderful. And please do put your questions into the Q&A. If you have questions in the chat, we'll have a look as well. But we'd love to also hear from you in the audience. If you have questions to any of our speakers about their presentations or about this topic in general or your experience with the topic, we'd be very happy to hear from you in the Q&A. But first, I wanted to now turn back to our panel. And we heard in the opening and in the recommendations from Alexandra around this need to ensure that ownership and participation is really held there at the center of this work. And I wonder, I want to turn to the panel and ask how, in your opinion, do we ensure that our efforts for digitization really favor ownership and participation of concerned individuals and communities? And maybe taking that one step further, how do we take this back up to the states? How do we ensure that states see the actions that we're doing within our institutions or within NGOs, within communities? How do we ensure that that is being communicated as an essential part of their responsibility to uphold cultural rights? Does anyone have any ideas or reflection? Yes,
Yeah.
Alexandra, can I turn over to you first? I think we can jump in. But please, Alexandra first.
I think that I was delighted to hear about especially Peter when you talked about how you took the matter in your own hands and as a community, and we can see how wonderful results you have had, and that was really fantastic for all of us. But I think that we should press the states to have specific commitments and to ensure that in boards and in discussions and in initiatives, the vulnerable and marginalized communities and the vulnerable and marginalized groups are not only represented, because representation is, it can be very tokenistic, but their voices are effectively heard. So they participate, and they don't only participate, 1 in 20, which we see very often in boards. They don't only participate in giving their opinion, and then what happens, who knows? But they are the ones from the very beginning that have the first say on what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. And I think that, and I put myself in there as well, because there are a lot of people who are passionate about how digitalization can help the vulnerable and the marginalized. It is very easy to take over, and it is very easy to tell the world or the communities what they need to have. And of course, it is also very important that states realize that digitalization and the initiatives cannot come from the big tech companies. I think I am very worried about how the big tech companies are taking over the discourse, and this means that the vulnerable and the marginalized are just not in the discussion at all.
Absolutely. I saw other responses. Peter?
Yeah, well, there are a few aspects to this. In terms of getting the states to act, that's a continuous lobby. We're tackling it from the institutional level. We're trying to do through involvement in UNESCO programs for national UNESCO commission, for instance, and through a continuous dialogue with our governments, with our ministers. Yeah, but action is needed. So that's what Alexandra started with, and I fully concur in that. The other aspect is community participation. Even when you're doing this from an institutional standpoint, that does not guarantee that everybody's voices is heard. Everybody's voice is heard, and that's where community participation projects like a Wikimedia and Papimento in our case, or programs to make sure that people can add things themselves to discuss this knowledge. We're just doing our piece. As an institution, as an individual working in an institution, your reach is limited. But if you just manage to create just one spark and through collaboration try to fix the other parts or help the other parts get moving faster, yeah, that's how we try to contribute on our level.
Thank you. And I'm seeing, Tapani, and I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in. So maybe we can take a few more reflections here and then move to the questions, but please.
Yeah, thanks. So it was the role of state was mentioned, and communities have been mentioned many times, which is great. I have one example in Finland. When the UNESCO's Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage was ratified and put into action, we were like figuring out how do we recognize the intangible cultural heritage in Finland. And we decided to make a wiki platform with MediaWiki tools so that the communities themselves can make articles about their heritage and publish it on the wiki page. So that's basically open for every representative of some community, and they can publish their information, pictures and text about their heritage, and it's working very, very fine. There are lots of examples of different kinds of cultural heritage around Finland, and that's the basis for the like national list for the inventory and for the suggestions to the UNESCO's list. So that's one approach.
Thank you. And I think, Tapani, there is also a direct question from you in the Q&A. How do you approach content partners using differing metadata schemas when they send you their records? You can either answer live or you can type your answer in if that's maybe a little bit more of a specific question.
Okay, I will try to find it from the.
You'll see the Q&A in the bottom. I think there's been several questions that came in via the chat first before we went to the Q&A. Let me see. There was a comment on recognizing Indigenous peoples and local communities, which is well noted. And let's see. We have a general question for the panel. How can we balance the seemingly competing aspirations of making diverse forms of knowledge and languages more visible and available to the world, while at the same time protecting these from undue data mining, cultural misappropriation, and commodification without consent or benefits for these communities where the languages and knowledge originate? And that is also in the Q&A, a similar question. Is there a point where open access can harm cultural memory or identity? So does someone want to jump in on that? Sylvia, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. Well, yeah, it's a little bit answering the previous question and connecting with this second one. And I feel that, I'm sorry if this parallel is not the best one, but it's the one that comes to my mind when we were thinking about nuclear power and thinking, oh, should we, go further in that line of discovery because then we have nuclear bombs. And I feel like it's not the same parallel. I'm sorry, it's not the best metaphor I've come in my life, but I feel like opening knowledge sometimes feel like that, like, oh, should we do it? Because then if we open, then these other bad things can happen. And I feel like that is precisely what Alexandra was saying also about talking with the governments and so on, because it is for them to create the barriers that protect knowledge from being misused. I feel like if there's policies in place that take care of those type of things. But also I feel like, again, when it's the people who are taking control of the way they want to share knowledge. So for instance, in the IFLA project that we talked about before, they used Wikibase because Wikibase allows them to share certain information and to keep certain information private. So Wikibase allows you to decide to what extent things should be public and to what extent things should be private. And I think they but they are the ones deciding. It was not the Wikimedia Foundation. It was not Wikimedia Deutschland saying, these are the things you should open. It was the National Library of Nigeria, the librarians there who are experts determining, I forgot the word. Thank you. So yes, I think this is key. It's the main takeaway we took from Wikimania in South Africa was nothing about us without us. So I think this is the right path. It's people deciding the way they want to share and the amount of things they want to share, but also governments creating the safeguards, that prevent misuse and keep people accountable, and not just people, but companies, as Alexandra was also saying before. Yeah, please.
Yes, please.
I don't know, maybe somebody else would like to come in, but just to answer initially, can open access harm communities, and in which way? Yes. So, you have a knowledge that is considered knowledge for educational reasons. So it is without not copyright, it doesn't have copyright. So this knowledge belongs to a minority. This knowledge is used by a big company. They tweak something, they make it their own. So then the community, and then they can copyright it. So then the community whose knowledge actually derives, is on the basis of this, cannot really access this because the big company has actually used it for commercial reasons. Now, how are we going to solve this? So first of all, there you go, when open access is really good, and we should ensure that there is open access. Open access, it is about knowledge, and it is about, progress, and we all kind of want that. But at the same time, there have to be some balancing, and some discussions, what are going to be the guarantees, so that the open access does not really work in the detriment of specific entities. Who is going to do that? Well, the international organizations are going to do that, but they have to be open to talk about these things beyond their little kind of fragmented area of focus. And the states. If the states, say, isn't it amazing that we have technology? Well, if this is what it's all about, no real discussion is going on. This is the first kind of question. And the second question is, how are we going to learn technology? How are we going to use technology in a way that it does not trump human rights? So yes, I'm all for technology. And if you see me in my real world, I am very much in favor of technology, etc. But we have to agree that there are going to be times where the two cannot coincide. Technology cannot coincide with human rights. And we are going to try, we're going to do our best to make it kind of work together. But if they don't, we have to agree that human rights have to come first. And this is something that I don't see. What I see is states coming to the discussion of my report. I think that, Claire, maybe you were there when the digitalization report was discussed, and all the states were saying, the only thing they were saying is how great technology is. There were no states that actually saying, yes, but when we talk about technology and human rights, they're really important, but human rights really should prevail. And this is what I want to see from Mondial Code.
Any other reflections? I think that's coming really to this core of balancing the opportunities that can be presented, but also, as you say, not going fully in of this is going to solve every problem. Technology is amazing. We go with no brakes on. So I think being able to link into the policymaking space is going to be so critical here. And let me see, I think we have some questions on AI coming in, and we don't have so much time to dig into all of the everything around there, but I think, is there any reflection on how we can be a part of, as policy and process around AI is being developed, how can voices from our sector be a part of this? How do we make sure it's not just technology and not just the technology side having these conversations? Does anyone have any idea, or does this go back similarly to how we interact with the states, and it's simply doing it, and it's simply advocacy? Peter, please.
Well, within and with Creative Commons, there's been a recent discussion about, well, an initiative called CC Signals. Maybe that's an interesting initiative to talk about in a few minutes. I'm looking at Brigitte, perhaps, putting her on the spot.
Sure, I'm happy to say a few words about this. The CC signals are new tools that we are looking into developing to address some of the shortcomings of sharing in the commons in the age of AI as a complement to the CC licenses and public domain tools that already exist. And the goal of the CC signals is to empower data stewards with the agency to have a say over how they want the content to be used, especially for AI training purposes. And I won't go into the details, but I will send a link so that you can read more. And the idea is that these tools can help those that manage, in particular, cultural data or cultural heritage as data, and decide on which conditions they would like them to be used as a contribution to the development of AI tools and systems. So I'll invite you to read more about this on our website. And thank you, Sylvia, for already sharing the link.
Thanks. I'll put a link in as well on a recent statement from IFLA in a similar sense. I think the takeaway there with the AI question is it's something that is being actively considered, and we just need to continue to show up and make sure these decisions aren't being made without the culture sector and without culture actors from across the culture sector and the memory sector included. So I think we're really coming to the end of our time together today. And Sylvia, please, do you want to? We still have just another few minutes, but please.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to point out also an amazing post that a colleague of mine wrote about if it's possible to gender AI and like reflections of what happens when you include people. And diversity is not only in terms of what things are shared, but also who are the decision makers. And I think this is a very powerful thing as well. Like when diversity is also among those who take the decisions around AI tools and so on, then you can also see a change. But that was just a really little note, and I shared the post in the chat. Thank you.
But I think it's a small note, but it really goes back to what is at the heart, where it's not just about representation, it's about actively being a part of the decision-making process and having agency from the beginning and from the very core. So thank you for sharing that. With that, I would like to thank all of our speakers today for sharing your insights, sharing your passions and your ideas and the amazing work that you're already doing. There's so much that's happening within this sector. And I really hope that from our side, on behalf of IFLA and Creative Commons and from the NGOs that are active in UNESCO, we are really excited to be able to bring these all of this work that's being done across the world into the policy space and really advocate for the work that you're doing. So I would like to, again, thank you all for being here. Brigitte, if someone would like to keep in touch with TERAC and what's happening, what could they do?
Yes, so if you're interested in our TERAC coalition and bringing these issues to the international community to help us set a global standard for equitable access to heritage, I just shared a link in the chat. Visit our website or get in touch at info@creativecommons.org, and we'll help you navigate this. And I just want to also thank our panelists for this really inspiring conversation. Thank you also to all the participants with all your questions and comments. It's been really an enriching experience. And yeah, I'm very glad that we could have that conversation, and hopefully we can continue that within the Mondial Cult context, but also in all of our respective areas. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope to see you soon again.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.